Hi, this is Katie Weeks, your independent Stampin' Up! Demonstrator. Check out these gorgeous papers from the Winter Meadow Designer Series paper pack. I love them. You get 2 of each one, and this was the paper pack that everyone received at my recent crop in January. So everybody got a pack of this paper and they got one other pack of paper. And here are all of the coordinating stamp colors. I just pulled them out because I haven't decided quite what I'm going to do yet, but there's a whole lot of choices for colors that I can work with. And I even pulled out a few Stampin' Blends. So let's get started. I am first going to cut this first page. It is beautiful. And I'm cutting around all of that foliage. And once I have cut around that foliage, I'm going to mount it on 2 sheets of white paper, I think, but I might change my mind. I kept the scrap that was from between those, and I'm pulling out these dies from the Golden Greenery, and I'm going to cut from some of my different things. I'm also using frozen edges and maybe the Snowflakes and Sophisticated Sled. I just pulled out some winter things. And so I'm saving that middle section, and I will be using probably the back side of that middle section. And I also want to make this background sort of look like that middle section. And I played with a few different things, and then ultimately I think I chose a different paper. But first I'm going to show you how I cut some mats. I am using the green, Garden Green two-tones cardstock, I believe. And I am coming in at 6.5 inches, and I'm cutting up from 4.5 inches. And then I rotate it 90 degrees and put it at 6.5 inches and cut from the 4.5 inch mark up. And I keep doing that all the way around my cardstock 4 times. Then I'm going to line it up at 4.5 inches, and I'm going to cut up from the bottom 6.5 inches. So I just keep lining this up at 4.5 inches, and then I'm going to cut off that bottom 6.5 inches. And when I do this all the way around 4 times, it will leave this funny looking pinwheel type shape that's left over. And I'm just going to cut off those little wings and end up with a square, and that will be some of my little scrap pieces of paper. But that's how I get 4.5 by 6.5 mats for my pictures out of one 12 by 12 piece of paper. And then I even have a few little scraps left over. Now let's do this again with a piece of the DSP. I actually want to use this as a second mat behind my picture. So I'm going to go to 6 1/4, and then I'm going to cut up from 4 1/4. And then I'm going to rotate 90 degrees, line it up at 6 1/4, and go down to 4 1/4 and cut up all 4 sides all the way around. And that's perfect. Now I'm going to put it down to the bottom of my trimmer and put it at 4 1/4 and cut up 6 1/4 inches. Looky there, a perfect mat. And I'm going to keep rotating 90 degrees, line it up at 4 1/4 and cut up 6 1/4 inches. And then I rotate 90 degrees, line it up at 4 1/4 and cut up all the way around. And again, I get this little piece, extra pieces of paper, and I have these if I want to mat with them, or I can use them however I wish. Okay, next I'm going to show you some of my die cutting process, and I don't always show you this because I kind of think it's a little monotonous to watch, but I want you to see how much I can get out of just these scraps. So I cut out the 2 pieces of foliage from 1 piece of 12 by 12 cardstock, and I saved all of this in between. So I'm going to see how much I can cut out of just my scraps. I have the 2 pine boughs that came out of the Golden Greenery, and then I have the 2 other leaf type things, sprigs that I can cut out. So I'm going to fit as much as I can on any little piece of scrap and then send it through my die cutting machine. Oh, I hope I get that die off of my machine before I run it through. There we go. Good. That would not be good. Okay, so I'm going to crank this through and I get some scraps cut up and then I just keep cutting through it. Now, when I say that I do scrapbooking, I use scraps. Like I use every little bit of scrap that I can possibly use. So I just keep cranking this through, seeing what I can fit. Sometimes I can't even get one whole pine bough out of something, but if I can get enough to peek out from someplace, then that is what I'm going to use. So I just keep playing with it, running it through my machine and cutting a whole bunch of extra pieces that I can tuck behind that foliage that we had cut out earlier. And next I'm going to cut a frame. It's going to have 1 inch around 3 sides and then just a smaller border on the other side. So what I'm doing is lining my cardstock up at 1 inch on the right side of the blade and cutting from 11 inches up to 1 inch. And I did this 3 times. And then when I got to the last side, I don't need a full inch. I'm going to line it up at about a 1/2 inch, and I'm only going to leave a 1/2 inch border on the one side so I can have as large an extra piece of cardstock as possible. And you'll see why that one side is a little thinner in a few minutes. So I did this twice with 2 pieces of cardstock. It gave me a 1 inch frame around 3 sides and a 1/2 inch on the one side for each of these frames. And then I have all that extra Misty Moonlight cardstock that I can use later. Next, I'm going to bring in one of the back sides of the DSP. Like that blue Rolly Hills is beautiful with the pine trees, but I'm using the back side. I really want that marbled side. That's my favorite that I wanted to be able to use. And it is cut 11 inches by 11.5. So that will give me a 1/2 inch border on 3 sides is what I'm really looking at. And I did that for both pieces, 11 by 11.5. So I trimmed off a 1/2 inch from one side and a 1 inch from another side on both pieces of that marbled textured cardstock. And then I'm going to use this when I lay it down as my backgrounds, and I'm going to have it meet in the middle so that there's really no frame around the very middle of those 2 layouts. Can you see how they kind of come together? And what I'm doing here is just trying to figure out which way I like the marble meeting up in the center. And I'm going to actually put the foliage on the bottom left and on the bottom right. Now, I'm covering up a lot of that marble, and I really like the marble and I like the backside of that print. So I just kind of marked a couple places so that I could cut a triangle. So I'm just kind of taking a snip there and a little snip on the bottom, and I'm going to slide that piece of DSP into my trimmer and trim away part of it that's going to be covered up by foliage anyways. Does that make sense? I just want to save as much of this beautiful paper as I possibly can. And I kind of looked at the middle and traced some little spots. Oh, I didn't even use my cutter. I just used my scissors. I just want to make sure that the foliage will completely cover all of those spots, and I can erase those pencil marks later. And here I just kind of put a little snip in the corner and then another snip up here. Sorry, my arm's in the way. You can't really see it. And I had marked some things. Oh, and this one, I did use my cutter. So I just bring it in and I find those 2 snip marks. I line them up in my cutter and I whack it off. That will give me enough scrap that I can still do something with that pretty piece of DSP. And I might not even use it on this particular layout, but I love it and I want to make sure I have some of it left over. So next I need to adhere this down around those 4 sides with what frame I have. And A lot of people wouldn't necessarily make it a complete four-sided frame, but I think by leaving that 1/2 inch on the right side, it will give me a little bit more stability to my pages. I was actually taking this page, this layout, 2 pages, to a crop to use as an example, since this was the paper pack that they were going to get at the crop. So I knew that a few people might be handling it. It gives it a lot more stability, in my opinion. And then I'm just going to line this foliage up at the bottom left, and you can't even tell that I saved some of that marble cardstock or DSP. It just doesn't even show. And I'm going to adhere this down and make it as seamless as possible to blend right into that marbled background. And I don't adhere the whole thing down really well. I kind of leave it open and flapping to begin with, because I want to come back in and tuck in some of those different things that I cut from my scrap paper. So I am going around and adding this other one. This other piece of foliage is a lot smaller. So there was a large piece of foliage. I put that on the bottom left. There was a smaller piece of foliage, and I put that on the bottom right. For the side with the larger piece of foliage, I'm only going to add one photo spot. And then for the one that has on the right that has a smaller bit, a corner of foliage, that one I think I can get away with 2 photos that'll be in there. Now the foliage might overlap just a little bit, so I'm going to have to be particular when I eventually choose pictures down the road, and maybe not zoom in so much when I print the pictures or something, because there might be some foliage that overlaps, but I think that'll be all right. I really think it'll give it a really nice organic feel to this whole layout. So here I'm just kind of tucking in some of the different pieces and seeing what I have to work with. So I love the ones that are kind of different than the pine needles. I like the pine needles, but I cut those in a few different things. I cut them in some of that background, that DSP paper. I cut it out of some of the two-toned garden green, two-tones cardstock. And do you see right there what I did? I even cut a tag out of the one photo mat. When I say I'm a scrapbooker, they're all of them, I guess. I cut some tags out. I know I'm going to use them on something. Even if I don't use them on this layout, I will definitely use them on something. And I still have some of this DSP left, and I want to be able to have a sampling of the different papers that I can use when I create some other embellishments on the next layout. So I do have a layout that I posted the other week that I put up for, and it says snow and ice, I think, on the title. So I will link that layout here so you can check that out and get another idea for the Winter Meadow DSP. So I'm covering these up. If you were to go in and get some of this Winter Meadow DSP, and oh my goodness, I hope they still have some of the Golden Greenery dies, because those were just beautiful, and I've used those over and over again. The other ones that I've used a lot is the Greetings of the Season dies. That's what I cut those tags out of. So here you'll see a tag, and I actually think I'm going to go with a smaller title that's just on this tag for this particular layout. So in the past, I've done huge titles on everything, and I don't know why, but I think every layout needs to have a huge title, and I'm realizing I don't necessarily have to do that. So I'm coming in here with one of my blue stamp pads. I believe this one is Blueberry Bushel, and I have the stamp that says Snuggle Up and Hope for Snow, and that one is from the Frozen Edges stamp set. And you'll notice that I put some snowflakes on that marbled background. Those were also stamped with the Blueberry Bushel, and they were second and third generation. I think most of them were actually third generation of the blueberry bushel. So you'll see some of those scattered on the back of that marbled DSP. And those snowflakes that I stamped were from the sophisticated Sled stamp set, as well as the frosted forest. No, from the Frozen Edges stamp set. Oh my goodness, there's a lot of winter stamp sets that I've used on this. So you see, I'm stamping some more snowflakes on second and third generation right onto that tag as well. And that's how I did it on the marbled background also. So while you're watching this, I want to let you know we are currently promoting our biggest sale of the year with Stampin' Up. It's called Sale-abration. So for every $60 worth of products in the US that you purchase, you get to pick out a free item. And there are paper packs, there are stamp sets, there's a card kit. There is something for everybody in the Sale-abration flyer. So you want to check it out. And if you decide to spend more, there are even some choices for $120. That would be other stamp sets or stamp and die sets. I love the stamp and die set that's called Heart Shape. I've used that a lot. So just keep an eye out and see if there's something here. Maybe you love this winter meadow paper as much as I do, as well as some of these dies that have worked so nicely. And this would be a great time to snatch those up and get some free items in the process. And you can jump over to my website, katieweeks.stampinup.net. So here I'm tying on some ribbon, and these dies have small holes. So I have some sheer ribbon that has little white dots on it. They remind me of snowballs. And so I fed that through the hole, and then I took my bordered ribbon, it's that blue ribbon, and tied an adorable little bow on the front. And I think that gives the perfect finishing touch to this. So I think this will be pretty much close to the end of what I do for the layout, except for one finishing touch. There's some adhesive sequins, I think you would call them, that look like snowflakes, and I believe we are out of them. I gave a little strip of these to my crop attendees who received this paper pack, and so I have used up every last one of my sequins, or I have gifted them to my patrons. But I love these. They are so adorable. They are so delicate, and I put those little sequins between on the middle of each of those large snowflakes on the background of that marbled DSP, and it just gives the perfect finishing touch. And you'll see here I'm using some dimensionals just to pop up my tag, and I think when I pop up with those dimensionals, it gives a way for that ribbon not to be too sticking out. Does that make sense? It brings up the tag a little bit to make it have the perfect surface and be elevated just a little bit for the whole tag. So here I'm going to go on and put on those little sequins next. Whoops, I guess there's one more step I forgot that I did. I had to go back in, and there was still more foliage that I wanted to add. So I'm adding the foliage and trying to decide where everything goes. And I'm really trying to separate out things so that they are really scattered across the two pages. So as I'm going, you might see like some of that garden green pine bough in one place, and then I try to separate it before I put in the other one. And this is just part of the playing around with your embellishments. I didn't really do the traditional embellishment clusters because I think these big pieces of foliage really make their own statement, but I did try to separate out and disperse the pieces that I was putting in, like this next little spruce twig so that everything wasn't clumped up together, if that makes sense. And then once I got everything placed where I thought I had the best placement, I'm going to go back in and add my adhesive and glue everything into place, except for the ones that are overlapping those photo spots. Those I left nice and loose so I could still slide a photo in behind there. And I can replace or put on top of that photo spot that I have there, or I can trim those photos down just a smidge and have 3 mats behind those photos. And how I decide if I'm going to trim down the photo or just put it right on top is usually based on the coloring. And if I think that the white adds a nice pop behind it, then I use it as an extra mat. So here you'll see me going through and gluing all the little pieces down. So I hope you've enjoyed this, and I hope you have seen one of the great possibilities of what to do with this large foliage. I found a video where Julie Carrier did a similar thing on the corners, and I was like, yes, that's what I've been envisioning ever since I've seen this paper. And she actually cut some of these Golden Greenery, I believe, out of vellum, and it was absolutely gorgeous. And I just did not have any vellum that didn't have a bunch of patterns on it, so I didn't have any good plain vellum to stick behind here, but vellum would be a gorgeous addition to add in with all of this greenery too. So I would recommend that, and go look up her video. If I can find it, I will link it here as well. It was beautiful. And now you'll see me coming in with some of the mini dimensionals to give a little bit of dimension to some of this. I just liked when some of it was flat, some of it was a little bit elevated, and it just gave it a really nice look. And the ones that were on the left side, I believe some of them hanging over the pictures had some dimensionals, and I just did not pull off the backing because I did not want to stick it down to that photo mat. I want the pictures to still slide underneath the foliage, and then I can choose to take off that backing for the dimensionals, or I can just leave it on there and it should lay just fine inside the protector. Like, comment, share, and subscribe for more crafty inspiration.